They burned her wedding dress and took her bound until a quiet man said, "Now you answer to me." Some towns were born of greed, some of blood, but Greystone Hollow was birthed by a lie so foul it stained the earth darker than any grave. Clara May Whitlock stood beneath the dying branches of a cottonwood tree, her hands dusted with flour, her eyes fixed on the slow approach of twilight. The wind stirred dry leaves along the porch of the Whitlock ranch house, and somewhere far off, a coyote called once and fell silent. Inside, her dress hung from the rafters like a prayer answered, soft ivory lace, stitched by her own hands, hemmed with patience and hope. Tomorrow, she'd marry Lou Calder, a man whose voice could settle wild horses and whose laugh once coaxed joy out of her grief-hardened father. It was the kind of life Clara had worked for, quiet, earned, and wholly hers. That was the last moment peace touched her. Lark Connolly came riding just as the sun sank behind the Blackstone Bluffs. He looked smaller than she remembered, gaunter, older, a crack in him where strength used to live. Dismounting with a grunt, he held his hat in shaking fingers and didn't meet her eyes. "I won't be staying," he said, voice thick with dust and memory. "You've come all this way," Clara said, stepping down from the porch. "You should at least take water." But Lark shook his head. "Ain't time. I just came to say this. The hollow's stirring. And if the hollow rides, you run. You hear me, Clara girl? Don't look back. Don't ask why. Just run." Clara frowned. "Greystone Hollow? That place ain't been mentioned in years. Not since your mama passed," Lark interrupted, his voice cracked as old timber. "I rode with her once, back before she changed her name, before she found the strength to leave that godforsaken canyon. You were just a baby, wrapped in her shawl. But the things she ran from, they ain't dead. Just waitin'." She wanted to press him, to demand answers, but Lark mounted and was gone in the dust before she could speak. The evening sank deep and quiet after that. Too quiet. Luke never came to supper. Her father's cattle stirred uneasily in the lower pasture. The sky turned an unnatural color, not the blue-gray of dusk, but a strange copper, heavy as rusted iron. Then the horses came. They moved like a storm across the land, kicking up clouds that swallowed fences, gates, and the night itself. A dozen of them, masked riders in long coats that flapped like wings of vultures. Clara saw her father step out onto the porch with his rifle, and she screamed for him, but it was too late. The first shot echoed across the valley, and then the second. Her world split wide open. They didn't speak. Not one word. Their leader was a man with silver hair pulled tight at the nape, a face carved by blade and time, one eye fogged like frosted glass. His name would come later, Harlan Voss, but in that moment he was only death made flesh. He dismounted and walked through her mother's herb garden, crushing rosemary and lavender beneath his boots as smoke rose behind him. They dragged her out by the arms. She fought, clawed, screamed her father's name. The barn burned, the flames licking the heavens, and her dress, that ivory dress, was pulled down from the rafters and tossed onto the fire. She watched it curl into black ash, the lace disintegrating like memory, the fabric writhing in flame like a living thing. One of the riders bound her wrists with coarse rope. Another tied her ankles. Her mouth stayed uncovered, but her screams had gone hollow. Voss stood before her then, close enough she could smell the dust and leather and old whiskey on him. He said nothing, simply stared. Then he knelt beside her and whispered just one word. "Whitlock." Her breath caught. "You bear the name," he continued, low and cold. "The last of it. The debt's come due." She spat at him, blood running down her lip from where one of the others had struck her. He rose, wiped his cheek with his glove, and signaled the others. She was slung over a saddle like a sack of grain, her face turned to the scorched ruin of the only home she'd ever known. Her father's body lay in the doorway. She saw the edge of Luke's hat near the well and knew, with a shudder, that he hadn't made it either. Ash choked the air. Her wedding ring, still in her apron pocket, burned against her leg like a brand. They rode hard into the night, down trails she didn't know existed, through dead canyons and into a darkness no lantern could penetrate. Wind screamed through narrow stone corridors, pulling at her hair, rattling bones in old graves left unmarked. They passed a rusted sign nailed to a post eaten by time. Greystone Hollow, beyond here, no god watches. Her soul froze. In the distance, high upon a rock shelf woven with rope bridges and creaking timbers, the lights of the hollow flickered like the eyes of some ancient beast waking to feed. She thought then of her mother, stern, gentle, eyes always scanning the horizon like something might catch up. She remembered how her mother had once warned her. There are places where the sun don't shine honest, Clara. If you ever hear the name Greystone, you turn and ride. She hadn't understood. Not until now. The hollow swallowed her whole. And whatever waited within didn't want ransom. It wanted revenge. The path that wound down into Greystone Hollow was so narrow and steep it seemed to vanish beneath the hooves of the horses. Clara had barely lifted her head when they tossed her over the saddle, but she felt every shudder of the beast beneath her. Every jagged rock it kicked loose as they descended deeper into that forsaken place. The walls of the canyon rose so high and tight that the sky was no more than a thin strip of bruised purple overhead. The wind moved like a hunted thing, shrieking through the narrow stone corridors, carrying with it a stench of old earth, stale smoke, and long-decayed meat. And then, suddenly, they arrived. Greystone Hollow wasn't a town. It was a carcass of one, a settlement built around the rotting skeleton of an ancient mine, the old timber supports and rusted ore carts left to sink into the canyon floor. Ramshackle buildings clung to the rock ledges like barnacles on a shipwreck. Rough-hewn cabins and crumbling lean-tos leaned drunkenly against each other, patched with scavenged wagon planks, stripped canvas, and tarps. Above it all stretched a lattice of rope bridges, swaying in the deadly wind, connecting the higher perches, where lookouts and sharpshooters squatted like vultures. At the center of it all yawned a deep pit, lined with gallows poles. Not one or two, but a circle of them, nooses swaying from beams, some bearing long-forgotten remains that twisted on the wind. Around the pit burned lanterns, their light flickering weakly against the stone and illuminating the cracked, dust-hardened faces of the men who called this place home. They threw Clara into a shack barely larger than a smokehouse, its walls so thin the night air knifed through them like ice. The floor was packed dirt, littered with old bones, tattered cloth, and a rusted bucket in the corner. She fought them as best she could, but her wrists were raw, her throat cracked from thirst. When the door slammed shut behind her, bolted from the outside, she sagged against the wall, her legs folding beneath her. Time crawled in that place. She couldn't tell if it was minutes or hours before the door opened again, the light from a flickering lantern outlining the hulking figure of Harlan Voss. He stepped inside with the confidence of a man who'd claimed every inch of the hollow as his own. The right side of his face was a map of old scars, a pale eye clouded by whatever had torn through him years before. In one hand he held a battered leather ledger, thick with papers. He crouched before Clara, a gleam in his good eye. "Your father had a habit of keeping records," Voss said, his voice low and rough, like gravel in a dry creek bed. "Deals made in blood, names of men who spilled it, where the gold went, where the bodies were buried. He kept it all. Hid it before he died. Now," he held the ledger out to her, "this one here's empty, but the real one's out there, and I figure you might know where." Clara glared at him, refusing to flinch. "I don't know anything," she rasped. Voss chuckled. "You'll think harder come morning." He leaned close, his breath heavy with whiskey and rot. "See, Whitlock blood runs clever. Your mama was clever. Ran from here, near got away with it. But reckon she left you something. Maybe in the dress we burned. Maybe in a wall, a stone, a book. Somewhere." When she said nothing, he rose. "We'll talk again soon." He left her alone then, though the jeers and rough laughter of the men outside never stopped. They came to the shack sometimes, throwing scraps of rotten food at her, calling her a witch's whelp, a blood-born traitor. One kicked her ribs when she didn't rise to take his coin. Her defiance was met with bruises, but no matter how badly they struck her, she would not weep in front of them. Not once. But there was one among them who was different. Clara first noticed him standing near the gallows pit, apart from the others. A tall, narrow-shouldered man, his face shadowed beneath the brim of a battered hat. He wore a long, faded preacher's coat, the hem torn and streaked with dust. Unlike the others, he bore no rifle, no pistol on his hip, and though the men called him Jonah, none seemed eager to share drink or word with him. At night, long after the others had staggered back to their hovels, Clara would hear the faintest scrape of the door. The figure would slip inside, a bundle of dry jerky and a waterskin in his hands. He'd kneel silently, untying the ropes that bruised her wrists, leaving the food within her reach. Once, she whispered a hoarse thank you. He only dipped his head and left without a word. It happened night after night. The man who called himself Jonah would come. Not every evening, but enough that Clara began to expect it. Then one night, one of the Hollow's men caught him. A drunken brute named Ketch Tanner burst in, saw Jonah crouched beside her, and let out a shout. Clara tensed, expecting Jonah to fight, but the man didn't lift a hand. He straightened slowly, let them haul him into the open, and when Ketch and 2 others beat him bloody beneath the gallows pit, Jonah made no sound. He didn't curse, didn't cry out, only stared at the noose swaying above him, lips tight, as if enduring was as natural as breathing. Clara watched from her shack, sick with something she didn't understand. It was after that beating, while the others bragged around the pit, that Clara first overheard it. 2 of the older men sat near her door, passing a bottle of something dark and dangerous between them, their voices low. "You reckon she even knows?" one said. "About her mama?" the other scoffed. "Hell no. Adelaide Whitlock was the one started all this. Led the bloodletting at Red Ash. Thought she was Savon folks. Didn't reckon she was making devils out of good men. Or what was left of 'em," the first muttered. "Whole Hollow built on it. Blood and lies. Anyone still carrying Whitlock's blood got a claim to pay. Cutter Bale swore it so." Clara's stomach twisted. Her mother? The woman who'd rocked her to sleep, who'd taught her to fish, to sew, to read scripture? The woman who'd warned her never to trust men who smiled too easily, who'd pulled her away from campfires when stories got dark. That woman had started this? And what of her father? Had he known? Had he been part of it? For the first time, Clara's fear turned to fury. A cold, gnawing thing in her gut. If it was true, then it would end with her. She would find the truth buried in this hellhole, and when she did, she would burn Greystone Hollow to the ground. One way or another. Her blood, her name, they didn't own her. The night air hung heavy over Greystone Hollow, thick with smoke from guttering lanterns and the sour musk of unwashed bodies. The wind howled through the high crevices like a warning, but the men gathered in the pit didn't hear it. Their voices were raised in drunken bravado, knives flashing in the firelight, the nooses above them swaying like vultures waiting for their meal. The mood had shifted since sunset, a restless tension thickening the air, and Clara felt it through the thin walls of her shack. When the commotion started, it didn't come in a roar, but in a hush, a ripple of fear that moved from man to man, quieting laughter, stilling hands. The Hollow's leader had returned, Sheriff Cutter Bale. The name carried like a death knell through the canyon. He was a legend among butchers, thought dead a decade past, shot through the heart and buried in the earth outside Perdition's gate. But there he stood, astride a black gelding, a pale-eyed wraith dressed in weathered lawman's leather, his face a map of ritualistic scars, twisted symbols carved long ago by his own knife. A man built of ruin and rage. The Hollow parted for him like wheat before the scythe. Clara's shack door flew open and Voss entered, his scarred face slick with sweat. He jerked his head. Out. The men dragged her to the pit's edge, shoving her to her knees before Cutter Bale. The fire cast his face in jagged relief, lips thin and bloodless, eyes so pale they looked blind, but she could feel them slicing through her. "This her?" Bale asked, voice graveled and cold. Voss nodded. "Whitlock's blood. Still claiming she don't know where the ledger's buried." Bale dismounted in one fluid motion, boots crunching on bone-strewn dirt. He crouched before Clara, his ruined face so close she could smell the sourness of old wounds. "Adelaide's whelp," he murmured, as if to himself. "A long trail, girl. Blood soaked every step. Time to pay." "I don't know anything," Clara forced out. "You don't have to," Bale said. "Sun comes up, rope takes you. Hollow's Law. The crowd murmured approval. Voss smiled eager. Then, a quiet voice cut through them. Not yet. The words weren't loud, but they cleaved the night, like a drawn blade. Heads turned. Jonah stepped from the shadows, the tattered preacher's coat clinging to him in the wind. His face was battered from the beating days before, blood crusted at his brow, but his eyes were steady. Baal regarded him. You speak now, Drifter? Jonah looked at Clara. His voice, when it came, was soft, raw with something ancient. I made a promise once, to the last of her blood. He stepped closer. You answer to me now. A hush fell, broken only by the creak of nooses above. Voss snarled. You got no claim, Jonah. She dies by dawn. Jonah's gaze never left Baal. She won't. Baal grunted, something almost like amusement in the sound. Careful, preacher. You're one man. Jonah tipped his head. Ain't the first time. That night, after the pit emptied and the drunken men fell to their beds, Jonah came to Clara's shack. This time he didn't sneak, didn't hesitate. He opened the door and knelt by her side, setting down a crust of bread and a tin cup of water. His hands trembled as he passed them over. I owe you an explanation, he said quietly. Clara could barely hold herself up. Then give it. He sighed, the weight of years in his breath. My name ain't just Jonah. It's Jonah Creed. Years back, I was a gun hand for hire. Did things men don't speak of sober. I married a woman named Cora in a town called Sparrow's Hollow. Had a boy. Thought maybe I'd outrun what I was. His voice cracked. One night, men from Greystone Hollow came. Said my town owed them a debt. Said a blood pact had been broke. 'Cause a preacher who fled their ranks had taken refuge there. I told him to ride on. His eyes darkened. They didn't. The memory came in pieces. The smoke, the screams, the faces of men he knew twisted in agony. I killed every man who raised steel that night, burned their camp to ash. But my wife and boy were already gone. Clara stared at him, her own heart hammering. What's that got to do with me? Before she died, Jonah said, Cora told me of a woman named Adelaide Whitlock. Said she tried to stop it. Gave her a ledger full of names, proof that the Hollow had stained half the frontier in blood. Told her to run with it, bury it deep. He swallowed hard. I promised Cora, if ever I crossed paths with Whitlock's blood, I'd keep it safe. Clara's throat tightened. She didn't want to believe it, but too much of it fit. The old warnings, the look in her mother's eyes when shadows stretched long. She needed proof. And revenge. I'm not dying tomorrow, Clara said. Jonah smiled faintly, something sharp behind it. Didn't figure you would. Before dawn, Clara found a way. A man named Albie Rook, thin and hollow-eyed, passed by her shack with a bottle in hand. Younger than the others, his face carried a deep, gnawing guilt. She called him over, soft at first, then louder. He hesitated at the door. What do you want, witch's girl? I know where the ledger is. Clara lied, keeping her voice steady. Your name's in it, Rook. Think about that. He paled, his grip tightening on the bottle. I give it to you, she whispered. And you help me out of here. His gaze flicked nervously toward the main camp. They'll hang me too. Not if no one knows. He hesitated. Then, with a shaking hand, he pulled a rusted knife from his belt and slid it across the dirt floor to her. You got till sunup. After he left, Clara's fingers worked fast, cutting the frayed rope around her ankles. In the scrap of burned cloth that was once the hem of her wedding dress, something hard pressed against her palm. A tiny, brittle scrap of paper sealed beneath a crude stitch. Her breath caught as she peeled it free. The words scorched but legible. I buried the blood debt beneath the preacher's cross. Her heart lurched. The preacher's cross. She knew the place, an old grave marker outside the hollow, half forgotten, where rope-bitten hangings happened before the pit was dug. The ground there was thin, easy to turn. Clara gripped the knife, her blood running hot. It wasn't over yet. The wind screamed through the narrow ravines like a living thing, rattling rope bridges and sending dust spiraling through the half-dead town. Greystone Hollow slept in uneasy shifts, its men drunk and stretched out around the fire pit, the nooses overhead creaking softly as if remembering old necks. The sky above had turned a deep, bruised purple, the first light of dawn still a long way off. Clara crouched in the corner of her shack. The rusted knife Albie Rook had left for her clutched in one blood-smeared hand. Her heart thundered, each beat a drum calling for war. Across the pit, she could see Albie's pale face in the lantern glow, his hand trembling around the bottle he pretended to nurse. When the sentry passed, Albie made his move. A quick, practiced flick of his wrist sent a stone clattering into the darkness beyond the pit. The sentry turned, half drunk, squinting toward the sound. In that heartbeat, Albie raised a finger toward Clara. Now. She didn't hesitate. The knife bit through the frayed rope at the door. She slipped out, keeping to the shadows of the leaning shacks. Every creak of wood felt deafening, every gust of wind a possible betrayal. Behind her, the hollow breathed and shifted but did not wake. The bridge to the upper ledges was little more than planks and fraying rope. Clara's bare feet bit against the splinters as she ran, the void yawning beneath her with every sway of the wind. She didn't look down. She didn't have to. She'd heard enough men speak of those who fell to know the bottom never gave them back. But luck only runs so long. A shout split the night. One of the lookouts had spotted her. Another voice joined it, Voss. She's loose. Cut the bridge. Clara sprinted, lungs burning. Behind her, a man took a shot, the bullet tearing through a rope above her head, sending the bridge lurching sideways. She flung herself forward, landing hard on the ledge as the bridge snapped and fell away behind her. The wind tunnels howled louder as she fled deeper into the canyons, following old paths, broken fences, dry creek beds. She knew where she was going. The words burned in her mind. I buried the blood debt beneath the preacher's cross. Blackstone Cross. A cursed patch of earth the hollow men wouldn't tread after dark. An old graveyard, long abandoned, where a crumbling stone cross still stood crooked over a scatter of unmarked graves. It was a place spoken of in broken sentences, where bones surfaced after storms and whispers chased you from the edges. And Clara ran for it with every scrap of life she had left. Back in the hollow, Jonah Creed stood in the firelight. His preacher's coat hung heavy with dust and blood, his face still a roadmap of old grief. Cutter Bale faced him, pale eyes gleaming in the rising dawn. You made your choice, Creed, Bale rasped. Jonah said nothing. His hand slowly moved to the inside of his coat. The hollow's men jeered, spitting curses, raising rifles. But then Jonah drew. 2 pistols, iron gray and polished from long use, emerged from beneath the coat. Not just any guns, those guns. The twin six-shooters men in border towns spoke of in fearful tones. The ones that had brought death to Sparrow's Hollow years before. A ripple of unease ran through the gathered men. Cutter's lip curled. So much for peace, preacher. I buried the preacher with my wife, Jonah said quietly, and I reckon death's been looking for me ever since. Then he moved. It wasn't wild, frantic gunfire. No panic scrabbling. Jonah moved like a shadow crossing water, silent, precise, and inevitable. The first shot took a man through the eye before his rifle left the ground. The second drove through Voss's throat, dropping him to his knees, blood blooming like dark roses across his chest. The hollow exploded into chaos. Men dove for cover, firing blind. Lanterns toppled. Dust thickened the air. But Jonah kept coming, one shot after another, each a clean, decisive promise. A man rushed him from the side with a hatchet. Jonah sidestepped and put a bullet through his chest without breaking stride. Cutter roared orders, rallying what few men hadn't fled. But for every man who leveled a gun, Jonah answered in kind. No wasted rounds. No mercy. Within minutes, bodies lay scattered across the pit, faces frozen in shock. The nooses overhead swayed empty. Jonah stood alone in the firelight, smoke curling around him, his guns heavy in his hands. At the edge of the old cemetery, Clara fell to her knees before the stone cross. It was ancient, half cracked down the middle, its surface marked with crude scratches, names long faded, the earth beneath it dry and bitter. The wind shrieked through the twisted pines. She clawed at the dirt with her bare hands, breaking nails, scraping knuckles raw. Stones bit into her skin. The old soil fought her, But she didn't stop. And then her fingers struck wood. A rusted, iron-bound lockbox, no bigger than a shoebox, lay beneath the earth. She yanked it free, snapping the brittle lock with a stone. Inside, bundled in oilcloth, was the ledger. She opened it with trembling hands. The ink was faded but legible. Names, places, dates, amounts paid, families betrayed, neighbors murdered, and at the bottom of each page, signatures. Harlan Voss, Cutter Bale, Jeb Dockery, and then, in a different hand, a final note. They made me sign. Threaten my girl. I led them here, and they slaughtered them. I tried to stop it. God help me, I tried. Adelaide Whitlock. Tears blurred Clara's vision. Her mother hadn't ordered the massacre. She had fought against it, paid for it, been chased for it. The ledger wasn't a weapon to barter with, it was evidence, meant to expose the devils who built this hell. She clutched the book to her chest, the bitter taste of grief and fury warring in her throat. A soft step behind her made her turn. Jonah stood there, smoke and blood on his coat, pistols still hanging from his belt. His eyes softened when he saw what she held. You found it, he said. Clara's voice cracked. She wasn't one of them. They killed her because she tried to stop it. Jonah nodded. I know. What now? She asked. He glanced toward the hollow, where the fire still burned low, the wind carrying the scent of death. Now, Jonah said, we finish it. Clara rose, the ledger in her hands, a storm in her chest. For the first time since that night on the farm, she wasn't afraid. The wind came down from the bluffs like a living thing, cold and sharp, carrying with it the scent of blood, gunpowder, and scorched earth. Dawn broke over Greystone Hollow in shades of dying embers and ash, the pale light revealing what remained of the night's reckoning. Bodies lay scattered around the pit, their faces frozen in the grim surprise of death. The fire in the gallows pit guttered low, casting flickering light across the crooked nooses still swaying in the wind. Atop the gallows platform, Jonah Creed waited. The preacher's coat hung tattered from his shoulders, streaked with blood both dried and fresh. His face was pale, and though he stood steady, there was a tremor in his grip. Beneath the coat, a crimson stain bloomed across his ribs, hidden from the others, but weighing heavier with each breath. The bullet had struck deep hours before, a clean shot from one of Voss's men, missed in the chaos of battle. He'd bound it tight beneath the coat, kept moving on will alone. Now, there was no running from it. Across the pit, Cutter Bale climbed the steps, slow and deliberate, every bootfall echoing against the walls of the hollow. The sheriff's pale eyes were narrowed, the deep, ritual scars on his face catching the light like old rope burns. He carried his iron with the lazy confidence of a man who'd killed too often to be nervous. They faced each other beneath the hanging ropes. Bale's voice was low, rough as a rusted blade. Could have ridden out, Creed. Left this place to rot. I made a promise, Jonah said, his voice steady despite the fire in his chest. Bale looked at him a long moment, then gestured toward the canyon's mouth, where the wind howled through the narrow cut. Ain't too late. Lay down those irons, preacher. Hollow's dead. No need for more ghosts. Jonah's grip tightened on his pistols. You go, and you don't look back. Or you stay, and you answer. Bale's lip curled. You ain't got the blood to finish me. Jonah smiled, though it hurt. Ain't my blood that matters. The sheriff spat, then drew. They moved at the same time, a blur of motion against the dawn. The first shot struck Bale high in the shoulder, spinning him half around. His own bullet grazed Jonah's hip, but it barely registered. Jonah fired again, and Bale staggered, a crimson bloom at his ribs. But the old lawman didn't fall. With a snarl, Bale raised his revolver for a final shot, and Jonah, with a grimace of pure, unyielding will, fired once more. The last bullet took Cutter Bale clean through the heart. He dropped like a stone, his pistol clattering across the boards. The nooses overhead swayed in the rising wind, a silent jury to the violence they'd witnessed. Jonah's knees buckled, and he caught himself against one of the gallows posts. The pain in his side flared, white-hot, his vision tunneling. The platform swayed beneath him as though the hollow itself grieved. Footsteps crossed the clearing. Clara appeared at the foot of the gallows, The ledger clutched against her chest. Dirt smeared her face. Blood crusted in the lines of her palms. She looked up at him, her expression a mix of grief and hard resolve. "You did it," she said, voice catching. Jonah managed a crooked smile. "Didn't do near enough." She moved toward him, but he raised a hand to stop her. "No. Listen." He forced the words out through gritted teeth. "This land, it's cursed in their blood, but it ain't in yours. Bury them, burn this place down, build something better, for them that never had a chance." "Jonah." "Swear it, girl," he rasped. "On your mother's name." Clara's throat tightened. She laid a hand over his, feeling the cold creeping into his skin. "I swear." A peace settled over Jonah's face then, the tension bleeding away like mist at dawn. He looked out across the wreckage of the hollow one final time. "I reckon I'm done running," he murmured. His grip slackened, his eyes going distant, fixed on something only he could see. A soft breath left his lips, and then he was gone. The wind carried the silence like a shroud. By midday, Clara rode out of Greystone Hollow with the ledger in hand. She left behind the charred ruins, the broken bridges, and the old pit, the hollow's remaining women and children, long forgotten in the shadows of their father's sins, followed in wagons and on foot. It took 2 days to reach the next town, where word spread fast. Federal marshals came within the week. The ledger sealed the fate of those whose names filled its pages. Greystone Hollow was burned to the ground. No man left from its blood-pact survived the season. Clara stood before the marshals herself, placing the ledger in their hands. "I'm not asking for mercy," she told them. "Only justice." And she got it. In the years that followed, the land was claimed by new settlers, families too poor to stake elsewhere. Clara stayed long enough to help them plant their first seeds, build the first church, raise the first fence lines. No gallows stood in the new town. No pits. The earth there was turned clean, and though the wind still howled through the canyons, it sounded like something closer to peace. When the last stake was hammered in, Clara rode alone to Blackstone Cross. The graveyard was quiet, the old stone cross leaning at a sharp angle, half swallowed by wild grass. Beneath it, 2 graves lay side by side, one marked by a crude wooden plank bearing the name Adelaide Whitlock, the other by a simple marker Clara carved herself. Jonah Creed. At the foot of his grave, she knelt, the preacher's twin pistols buried beneath the soil with him. In her palm, she held her mother's wedding ring, a small, unadorned band of pale gold. She set it at the head of the grave, the metal gleaming in the fading light. "I kept my promise," she whispered, "and I reckon you kept yours." The wind moved through the grass like a sigh. In the years to come, folks would speak of Greystone Hollow in hushed voices. Tales would twist in the retelling. Some claimed it burned for its sins. Others said a ghost in a preacher's coat came down from the bluffs and dealt judgment by gun and fire. But those who'd heard the true story, those who still gathered by tavern hearths when the nights ran long, they'd lean in and whisper of the day a quiet man faced death itself and said, "Now you answer to me." And no one ever dared speak against him again.